Fed officials, policymakers, and academics are all gathering here in Jackson Hole for the Kansas City Federal Reserve's annual Economic Symposium. Joining me now is Jared Bernstein, chair of President Biden's National Economic Council of Advisors. Chair Bernstein, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So the economy has been so much more resilient than many had expected in light of the Federal Reserve's most aggressive rate hiking campaign since the 1980s. How much of this resiliency do you think can be attributed to the president's big legislative wins on the Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS Act? And furthermore, when you look out to 2024, given that a chunk of this has yet to hit the economy, can we expect a more robust 2024?
Well, Jennifer, I like the fact that you chose this word resiliency because it's something that President Biden and the team have long thought about. I think if you didn't come out of the pandemic-induced recession without recognizing the need for more resilient supply chains, then you weren't paying attention. So yes, the answer to your question is that legislation that this president has gotten over the goal line, you mentioned CHIPS and the IRA, are certainly in the mix. But those are longer-term programs that pay out over many years. I would have added the American Rescue Plan because, of course, that was the first big legislative achievement that President Biden achieved. And in that case, those deep investments helped companies and families get to the other side of the crisis. Checks in pockets, shots in arms, vaccination rates went way up, and that helped set up this very strong labor market recovery that we continue to enjoy today.
Well, the economy is very resilient. Inflation, while it's come down, is still too high. It's the number one concern for Americans now as it pertains to the economy. In fact, I just spoke with Boston Fed President Susan Collins. She thinks there may be more rate hikes in store to bring inflation down. What is the president, the administration prepared to do to try to bring inflation back down this fall? Any new actions in the quiver?
I think the key action from our side is continue doing some of the things that helped get inflation down from over 9% back in last June to 3.2% last seen. We have to build on the progress we've made thus far. Now, we talked about implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. There are some very direct ways in which that helps to reduce price pressures going forward, particularly in the area of healthcare, but also clean energy production and the kinds of products that people will buy, whether it's an electric vehicle, a heat pump, something for your house, solar panels. And then, of course, on the healthcare side, the IRA saves 15 million families $800 a year on their coverage. Insulin prices down to $35 a month for people who need that. That's a big savings for them. And as the IRA continues to unfold, there are more healthcare savings in there from finally breaking Big Pharma's hold on Medicare's ability to bargain for lower prescription drug costs.
So I want to ask you about China. China's exports fell in July. At the same time, in the U.S. here, you're trying to lure manufacturing back to the U.S. We're seeing a lot of reshoring, and companies are trying to diversify their supply chains away from China, given the experience during the pandemic. Now, you've also put forth recently a long-awaited executive order, essentially limiting U.S. investment into China on semiconductors and AI. My question is this the beginning of, in some ways, a decoupling process from China's economy and a reordering of capital flows?
No, I see those as really quite different areas of policy and much more de-risking versus decoupling. So you mentioned particularly highly sensitive types of AI that can be militarized and weaponized. Quantum computing also should be on that list, and of course, highly advanced semiconductors. All of those are part of the executive order, and that's de-risking. That's not decoupling. Those are relatively small parts of trade flows, but they are highly sensitive technologies when it comes to our security. When it comes to broad trade flows, I mean, one of the things you can just point and click to the national accounts, at least through 2022. I think there's some cyclical movements there, particularly in China in more recent weeks and months. But you see robust trade flows, and that's important to us. We want to continue to see that. It's part of the effort to ease price pressures. But there is a real difference between de-risking, which is really a matter of national security, and decoupling, which is something that would really push back on trade flows that we value.
What's next for China when it comes to this administration?
Well, we're going to continue to work in all the areas of geopolitical and security sensitivity. I mean, I don't think anyone would be surprised to hear that people in very different departments than mine, so I'm not going to go into what they do, are watching very closely issues around weaponizing technology, for example. And that's why that executive order that you just mentioned is so important. This is, by the way, this is investment flowing from our country to China. And the areas, once again, quantum computing, AI, highly advanced chips, those are part of that executive order for security reasons.
Childcare is facing an existential crisis. In fact, we're up against what people are calling a childcare cliff on October 1st, with many of the subsidies and incentives that the president put forth during the pandemic set to expire. My question is, why hasn't the White House included a request for this in the supplemental? And do you worry that given where women are as far as the labor participation force at record levels, this could hurt them? And are you willing to reconsider a supplemental request?
Well, so first of all, CEA has written in particular about the importance of child care initiatives from that very perspective. And we've shown pretty clear evidence that helping to support child care, and this is something President Biden talks about a lot, no one should have to choose between getting their kids safe and affordable care or going to work. And typically we're talking about women in that case. And we know that countries that invest more in this have higher female labor force participation rates. So this remains a value. It's in our budget. We mention it in the supplemental. We talk about its importance, and we're really pushing Congress to really make the investments that are in our budget. Now, the ARP child care support was very, very important. There are a couple of 100,000 child care providers across this country who are still providing child care thanks to the help they got through the ARP. And by the way, it did permanently increase parts of child care spending, which took it from, I think, about $2.9 billion to $3.6 billion, so about $700 million. That's a permanent increase. So there are child care dollars flowing. But you are right. We need to do more. I don't think the supplemental is necessarily the path there. I think we need to implement legislative solutions, and there's no reason why Congress shouldn't support this.
All right. Well, Jared Bernstein, thank you so much for your insight. I so appreciate it.
Our thanks to Jennifer Schonberger for that conversation there from Jackson Hole.